Hello and welcome. This is Jürgen Mente from the International Labour Organization, ILO, and I'm very happy that you have all joined this webinar on making remote working work as part of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network's stream on workplace adjustment services that we have established in 2020. Some of you might have joined the first webinar of this series in early April. As like today's webinar, it was moderated by Susan Scott Parker, the CEO and founder of Business Disability International. And we're very happy as ILO Global Business and Disability Network that she is available to lead on this stream for us. Today's focus is on, as we said, remote working. And of course, this topic is even more important in terms of COVID-19 crisis and the necessity for many of us to work from home, including, of course, persons with disabilities. Before I pass it on to Susan to kick off the webinar, just a few housekeeping issues and accessibility guidance. You have at the bottom of your display of Zoom, you have the closed captions option. When you click on it, you can show the subtitles and you can also adjust the size of the subtitles. Further, we will have the option of changing the size of the presentation, the window of the presentation, by moving a slider left to right. I will copy in the chat box the guidance if you have never used that before. So please feel free to read through it on the Zoom help page if you need. And then one last comment. Any questions you might have during the presentations in general or while Susan is interviewing the two speakers, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. The questions will then either be addressed in writing or orally by the different speakers. So thank you very much for your attention, and over to you, Susan.
Start the video. You see, immediately we get into the wonderful world of making this technology work for everybody. So welcome. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I'm delighted to have two such extraordinarily expert and gifted colleagues to answer all and any questions that anyone might ever have in terms of how to make remote working actually work for everyone. So I'll say a few words in a moment, but just to be really clear, we have Christopher Lee, Managing Director of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals at G3ICT, joining us from America. And we have Nasser Siabi, the founder of and chief executive, and it's his business, Microlink. I'm never quite sure what to call you, Nasser, who between them, I don't know how many decades of really practical experience at making technology work in the real world at work with all the pressures on everyone who's trying to use it. This could have been a 3-hour session. I've been asked to make it really clear by my colleagues that they're going to take a kind of high-level view, walk you quickly through some of the basics that they think are fundamental to getting this right. Happy to then share resources. We've got some at the end in terms of links and so on. And I think we'll probably be planning another in the series. Our aim is really quite simple in a way, to help multinationals to get consistent best practice in terms of enabling everyone to get the tools and flexibility that they require to do well. It's a challenge for any organization operating worldwide. So I think what we're hearing now is that with the crisis, the learning in terms of how you get consistent access has just jumped. And people are saying we've done in 3 weeks what we would have taken 3 years to do prior. In fact, what I'm seeing now is, given our aim is, yes, enhancing productivity, well-being, engagement, at a time when people are being forced often to work remotely. But we're still seeing the learning, which says that actually, before this, we had this kind of strange idea that you had the needs of business and the needs of people kind of separate. So we'd talk about the business case and the ethical case as though they were in different domains. I think now the interdependence here is starkly visible. And we're seeing that what's good for people is good for business. And we're certainly seeing that what's bad for people is bad for business. So no matter all the downsides around the crisis, there is an opportunity here to leverage what we're learning about how to use technology so that it becomes easier for everyone. And that means easier for people with access needs with disabilities, because what we also know is that systems that work for extreme users work better for everybody. So while of course we're talking about people with access needs today, we're really clear that we're looking at how you get to a point where everyone in the team is benefiting because everyone in the team is in high performance mode. So Nasser's going to kick us off by looking at the context, looking at how and where the technology is being used, addressing the emotional and environmental demands, if you like, of remote working and where technology fits into that. So Nasser, you're under strict instructions. You have 7 minutes. Go.
Thank you very much, Susan. That was a wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Nasser Siabi. I'm founder of Microlink PC. We've been around for nearly 30 years, and we've used that power of technology Susan mentioned to actually overcome lots and lots of barriers and challenges faced by disabled people. So first message is, if technology worked 30 years ago to help disabled people, you should be assured that it is a lot better even today. So I don't think there will be any reasonable arguments against that. We can make a difference to disabled people. We use the modern technology, and it does have a massive impact on their well-being and obviously the contribution to society. So if I were to just share my screen on what I would like to talk about, we've always been in our comfort zone with regards to home working, because part of the solution for disabled people is to be able to work flexibly, working from home. And most employers were kind of shying away from that, thinking, well, if they're out of sight, we won't know whether they're doing their work. But quite frankly, over the past few weeks, it's been demonstrated life goes on and you can be productive. But setting up a home working, as we all discovered overnight, it has challenges. You can't just jump in there without considering the human impacts, physical and psychological. So you really need to set up your environment for a long-term health and safety. This is really important. This is not, you will hear this word many times, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So you really have to make sure you set up the physical environment, have the right equipment, define barriers and red lines in terms of well-being, because some people will have this culture of answering your emails middle of the night because they feel they have to prove themselves. Or you might even find that loss of communication between colleagues that has some impact on the relationships. You have to start communicating and communicating more frequently. So keeping the team momentum is very important during this time. Keeping the kind of a message constantly, the reassurance that we know they're doing the best and you don't expect miracles. But giving all the right environment, then they should be able to do their job and do it more than adequately, especially with disabled people. This is a chance to shine. And I think most people who weren't disabled have discovered what can happen to them if they don't have the right equipment. In a way, they could now empathize with lots of disabled people. For line managers, really take note. Some of the issues you hear, which probably impacts you as well, you've got to really watch out for them. Burnout, people would actually experience much greater psychological issues. So if I'm just going to the next page, yeah, here goes. So my main point here is no barrier is high enough that we can't overcome. We've proven that. But if you're looking at how to work in a place, really you need to define your working day. You can't just dive in there and try to do. You've got lots of competing events seeking your attention, and you've got to actually start pacing yourself, make sure you do best of useful work, go away, do some walking, do some physical movements. Not everyone will have a lot of space to work in. You know, you've got to actually start defining a corner where you want to work, make it feel like working and rather than part of your home, because you want to get away from that later on after you've done your work. So you have a comfort of your home rather than having to be in a work environment 24/7. So you've got to actually start looking at the techniques of improving your well-being by make sure you don't put yourself under a lot of stress and pressure. Oh, right, next. My apologies, my screen's right. I think the next part that really is very important. Do plan for long term. Do make sure that all the distractions that you might get across your work environment, you know, noisy kids in the background, that's part of normal living. But when it actually starts entering your world of work, you need to not only keep the balance, you also need to keep them apart. So there are lots of equipment you could have, like noise cancelling headphones, to try to block out any extra noises from outside, or you also have to make sure that you don't you know, forget doing things in the middle of having to attend to maybe another matter which is urgent. So always keep ideas, write it down in somewhere so you can, but make sure you keep up the communication with your team. Make sure you plan your days adequately. Make sure that you don't just sort of go into them not knowing what your day is going to look like. And that will give you that kind of a strategy of maintaining momentum and not losing your kind of working pattern. Now, the other very important thing is your physical space. You know, you really have to find a proper, safe work environment. Your DAC, which is really a mandatory requirement for workplace, needs to be followed at the home place as well. There are no differences. You're going to be spending hours and hours behind the computer. Know that some of you have been given very small laptop to say, okay, go home. This would be a temporary issue, but a few weeks and a few months later, you're still working on that laptop. It's not adequate. So you've got to start finding solutions where you can actually stop this strain on your back, on your neck, and your arms and hands, as well as your eyes, and on top of that, your mental health. So you've got to, again, follow the good guidance, take break after a few minutes of working, and do obviously make sure you look after physical, and you know, the work environment has to be comfortable. You know, some people may not have a choice, but you have to find a place where you could sit comfortably. Dinner table might be okay, but if you're sharing with others, it doesn't really work all the time. So that should be really a message to the employers. You know, that needs to be done for longer than an hour a day working on a laptop is actually a health and safety risk. Oh, these are very quick guidance and what you shouldn't be doing. You know, this is, we're all guilty of that, but in a long-term working arrangement, you have to make sure you do the right thing. This is obviously, again, depending on what facilities, what provisions you have been given, that's the right, correct principle. And you ignore that, unfortunately, you'll pay the price later. So these are very just basic guidance. Now, this list I'm showing here, this is really what every individual requires to have. You really need to have a large screen. You need to have a keyboard. You need to have a mouse. You cannot work on a laptop for too long. And these are basic principles of every healthy working environment. It helps your productivity, and it definitely keeps you healthy for longer. And of course, that's it. That's the first step. And I will. And one other thing is, before I forget, there are plenty of tools built in to the modern operating system. Years ago, we had to pay a lot of money to buy it, but these are now part of your everyday devices. You've all used Siri, and you've used maybe you've got the Amazon Echo and the likes. Speech-to-text recognition has become absolutely standard in everything, in the fridge freezers as well, and text-to-speech as well. These are built into Microsoft Windows, Office 365, Google, Apple. Magnification, again, you don't need to have a third-party software. If the IT departments make it available to you, you can use all these facilities without having to spend any money or break anything. And you know, if you can use that, you can be productive even if you don't have disabilities. You know, text-to-speech is wonderful if you don't want to type things. Your fingers are aching, two-finger typing is obviously popular, but you can actually speak as fast as you want. And like the captioning, it will take it down 100% accurate if you do it properly. The same goes for a speech to text. If you get tired, you can get the computer read documents to you. So all that is built in. It really just needs a bit of exploring what is available. And once you know, you're absolutely on. So that's it. I think I've finished my part, and I'll pass it to Susan for questions.
Not supposed to be muted. Unable to start video. You can't start your video because the host has stopped it.
No, you're on, Susan.
I love technology. I was saying to the team before this that if they can explain it to me, they can explain it to anybody. But I want to come back to what you were saying about those features that are already built in, because we know that many people don't actually know where they are, how to find them. I mean, if you were just to take one or two of them, because they don't seem to be used very, very often, they're not widely publicized. Could you say a bit more about perhaps a couple that are most frequently required, most helpful, and how they actually find them?
Well, I think the most popular one right now these days is like things like Alexa and Siri. You know, if you want something, you just ask it, you know, play me a music. But in Windows, if you look at the accessibility features, whether it's Windows, whether it's Google, then you have a host of lots of tools of what it does and how it works, lots of videos and learning. We've even developed a platform to show that to people to learn how to use them. And obviously accessibility checking is something very important. Every document we produce has to be produced accessibly. And nowadays you can actually click a button, it tells you if it's not accessible, what you need to do. So these are really within the help files of the operating system you work. Maybe some organizations haven't updated to the latest Windows 10. If that is the case, then unfortunately, there's going to be some catch up, but there are plenty of others available, open source, free of charge. But it comes down to the IT departments basically making it available. If not, there's a third-party software available all the time. These are the ones, established ones, which really have wonderful features.
So all I have to do is Google and say, I'm visually impaired and I want to use this. I want to use Zoom. Teach me how.
Well, it should be in one place. You might find you're overwhelmed with lots of information pages. As I mentioned, we realized that might not be in one location. So we developed a platform to bring everything together. So if people wanted to look at what's available for visual impairment or dyslexia or people with hearing loss, they can go into that section and look what's available in Microsoft and Google. But normally you have to Google, you get lots of information.
It's too much, I suspect. And so
the
platform that you've described, is it on the list of resources that we're providing today?
It will be. We are just finalizing the 2 or 3 other software because it's so much to put in there, but it should be very soon. I will pass it on to add it onto the list.
All right, and we'll share that with the Global Business and Disability Network. Excellent.
Of course.
Christopher, I think we're creeping up on you, sir. And you're going to play what TripAdvisor I said. Help us to look at these platforms that everyone is using or trying to use, like I just proved. I can't even get my microphone on. And you're going to take us through what works and doesn't work so well with each of them. Just your view of how you can help our members, particularly the managers who aren't IT specialists, to understand what's going on when their people are struggling to get it to work and what they might do about it. So that's your task. Just take us through the most frequently used now platforms and help us figure them all out. And you've got 7 minutes or 8. I'll give you an extra minute on this one because it's complicated.
Well, it's great to be here. And thank you, Susan, Nasser. And I definitely want to thank the ILO for inviting me to be here. We've got a crazy amount of information, as Nasser's mentioned, as Susan's mentioned, that we've crammed into this presentation. And the platforms out there can be complicated. Understanding where the features are that are beneficial for individuals with disabilities can be challenging because sometimes they're not right in front of you. For example, in Zoom, under the caption button at the very bottom of your screen, there's different options that are there. One of them is a transcript, and you can watch what I'm saying in real time and follow along, which is wonderful for people who may be speaking different languages that need that little extra Kick, and you can download that transcript. So there's all these great features built into different platforms. That was Zoom I was talking about. And so that's important. You know, there's a quote that I just want to share with you. It says here, when people with disabilities are excluded because of a product is not inaccessible, it's not only frustrating, but it's also effective to colleagues and clients you work with. And this quote reminds me of two individuals that I work with all the time that's on the IAAP Global Leadership Council. And they, if things aren't set up a certain way, and thus prepping and doing that for our meetings, it's frustrating for everyone. So I think that it's important to keep in mind that it's about timing, it's about prepping, it's not doing things last minute. And nowadays, in our world of virtual meetings, we jump on a call in 2 seconds, no matter what platform it may be in. So again, take a deep breath, plan on ensuring that all the features that you want to include in these platforms are known to the individuals that are participating in the event. So I'm going to jump in, and as Susan mentioned, this is very high level. There's going to be some very detailed notes when we send out this PowerPoint. So in the notes section, there will be detailed notes on the advantages and disadvantages of using these platforms, and we're going to focus on a few of them. The research out there is not heavy. There's not a clear view. There's some disability groups. I have one here called Fable that has done some internal review of what platforms are accessible from more the advocacy standpoint, the individuals with disabilities. So there's a lot out there, but the research, meaning that true research, there's just not a lot. So they're doing some real work. So we're going to jump here. I do want to just start off with sharing some common best practices when you are hosting a remote meeting, a video conference meeting. You want to make sure you use plain language. And if you don't know what plain language is, Google it. There's a whole group of individuals, specialists out there that specialize in you know, making sure that the deck that we use, the PowerPoint deck, the documents that we use within meetings, that they're plain language. They make sense to everyone. There's not a lot of acronyms in there and so on. You know, you want to reduce that. You want to be aware of color contrast and be aware. And there's lots of tools out there that deal with color contrast. So if you're low vision and you have trouble with recognizing white on blue or blue on black or whatever it may be, we have some real strategies around there. And there's a lot of information out there. Font sizes, choices, lots of guidance around that. You need to be aware of. So those are some of the best practices. Digital content should be accessible, meaning that if you've got a PowerPoint deck, if you've got an Excel sheet, if you've got a Word document, it needs to make sure it follows certain guidelines to make it accessible for somebody who's using a screen reader, so someone who may be low vision, the color contrast, that they can navigate through it, that the images have alternative text behind it. So when their screen reading software is reading it, it will pick what that image is. So that's some of that. And a lot of this stuff is built into different operating systems. Like, for example, with 365 Microsoft, you know, there's a lot of tools in there regarding accessibility of PowerPoints and Word and so on. You want to record the meetings when possible, just so you can go back and actually, if you miss something, that you can go back and check that out. And that's kind of goes hand in hand with the transcript. You want to send content to the captioner prior. So we have a captioner on board right now. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. And you want to make sure that you provide the PowerPoint deck or whatever it may be to the captioner beforehand, so they can look at the language and make sure that they're going to be accurate. We've already talked about the transcript. You want to be cautious when using chat and action items. So we have a chat button built into Zoom that we're using today. And it's sometimes challenging if you're saying, you know, Mary or Joe, whoever it may be, please follow up on this action item. Well, if it's not recorded and not picked up, that is not, it's not going to be in a good place that individual is going to remember it. Maybe somebody with a short-term memory loss or long-term memory. So you've got also reduce the emails, use apps and threaded and chats. So Microsoft Teams is excellent for this. It's a whole package that is out there that allows you to kind of build the work into not only video conferencing, but also in the documents, in and any kind of other actions that may be done through chats and so on. So you can keep track of that, and that's usually done by channels. So again, a lot of these are very robust applications, but there's some key best practices that we need to use in no matter which application that you're using. So okay, so I'm going to jump into each one of these, and knowing that I don't have a lot of time, I'm going to focus on the disadvantages. You see the advantages up here right now, and again, if some of you with visual impairment or blindness, we'll provide this in accessible format. It works well with AT, automated transcripts, closed captioning, third party, and so on. So there's a lot of positive things about Zoom that is pretty impressive. In fact, what's out there in regards to user groups doing accessibility testing, Zoom seems to pop up on the top for the most part. But some of the disadvantage with Zoom is that there's no live captioning available. So in Microsoft Teams, for example, they have AI, artificial intelligence captioning that's coming in, which is pretty good actually. Whereas we have to use a third-party vendor that comes in and provides captioning for us in Zoom. So that's something that I know that that is a big disadvantage, I think, between using Zoom and Microsoft Teams. The other thing is that it is free, obviously a free account. Closed captionings must be enabled in meeting settings. That's another option here that could be a little bit of a disadvantage. Due to this is interesting, but regarding COVID, due to the increased demand of COVID-19, the dial-in phone and audio conferencing capabilities may be temporarily removed. So there's some things that are popping in now just based on the environment, being COVID-19 that we're in. But overall, as you can see, the positive features of Zoom, it's a very powerful platform to use. Again, using those common best practices. Microsoft Teams, again, a lot of really incredible features in it. 365 is extremely powerful. Live AL, AI, I've just mentioned that regarding blurred background, which helps with vision in a sense, and focus like ADHD you may have, dedicated chats for each meeting. Interpreters can be added, navigation with keyboard, again, compatible with AT. It doesn't have the hand raising option yet, but that's coming very soon. Use of text and telephone, TTY. So some of the disadvantages, though, that are out there, and it is free, which is nice, is that the browser-based web app version doesn't support real-time calls or meetings. So this is a big deal. And it's something that needs to be corrected, and I hope it's being worked on, is that if you're not logging in through Wi-Fi or whatever, you want to be able to call in and have a phone number. And that's something that when you set up meetings within Teams, that doesn't have. Big disadvantage versus Zoom and Microsoft is not having that call live in number, that 1-886 number or whatever it may be. WebEx, challenging platform. It's got some disadvantages to it, and I've listed them here. Limited navigation on the keyboard, limited support for low vision, screen reading software, limited support for that. It works with the latest version of JAWS, and if you're not aware of JAWS, that is a screen reading, a very powerful screen reading tool, that the application that individuals with disabilities, specifically blindness, uses. Based on the different versions, it works with the application differently. So it works with the latest, but doesn't work with the older versions. Not everyone have the most current version of JAWS. So that's something to keep in mind when you're actually testing which platform you're going to use. Gotomeeting, extremely powerful. It's got a lot of things going on. Does high contrast mode, fonts and size, navigation, keyboards. It does have some challenges with it, and what's nice about it, it is free. It incorporates a lot of different features built into it, but it does have some challenges, which are going to be brought in just a second. So we want to talk about Skype. Skype is for Windows and for Mac. It's something that is kind of phasing out, maybe because we're seeing 365 come in from Microsoft, but it is still pretty powerful. It's got a lot of great features. It is free, lots of advantages. As you see, the disadvantages, it does not remember preferences for captioning, so that's important. So they must be enabled each time. Users must pay to use premium features. So there's some challenges there. I know I'm rushing through this. I do apologize. My time is out. I'm aware. So Google Hangouts is some really good information about that. It shows all the great advantages of Google Hangout. The disadvantages primarily is that this non-Gmail address can be only added to the video meeting if a user invites it by a G Suite. But overall, Hangout has a lot of positive features built into it. All these need to be tested, obviously, if you're going to be doing it. In regards to captioning, I think it's important. This kind of goes into best practices or common practices that need to be looked at. Live captioning using AI technology is still limited. It's getting better and better, especially in Teams. Some platforms have better captioning than others, where some platforms don't have it all. And in those detailed notes that you'll get with the deck, that will be built in there. Live captioning works best for one-on-one meetings and small groups, and that is true. We've seen that definitely true. And captioning is helpful for people who have hearing impairment, deaf, and the elderly. So that's also something to keep in mind. Just a little bit before I turn it over regarding virtual sign language and interpreters. There's some key points here to keep in mind. Use video remote interpreting to participate dialogue through webcam and computer audio. So you need that audio and the webcam. Obviously, if they don't have a webcam, that's going to be a challenge, and that's happened multiple times in meetings I've been in. Turn on multiple webcams, turn off multiple webcams windows to reduce interpreter distraction. So this is an important one. If you've got an interpreter up there, you've got everyone that's showing their faces on the screen, it becomes very distracting for the individuals deaf or hard of hearing needing the service. Prepare content. We talked a little bit about this before. Meeting content so it does not block the interpreter, meaning that you don't want the ball, like the Zoom ball, whatever, is to block actually the signing or the PowerPoint deck being shown. And then show a video conferencing navigation toolbar does not block the interpreter. We mentioned that. And provide breaks to switch interpreter. So if it's a longer meeting, it's important that you do break so the interpreters are able to change out. So that, again, is a lot of information that I've thrown at you. We will put a lot of this information in the notes sections in the deck. Again, when you're trying out different platforms, make sure that you do the research. When you're starting a meeting after your platform, you decide the platform you have, make sure you put this time aside to prep for that. Those are two very important things, and definitely follow the best practices, the common practices. And I'll turn that over to you, Susan.
Okay. Thank you very much. So immediately, Chris, we've got a couple of questions if we come back to Zoom. So there's a question saying, is there a difference in the accessibility, the usability-ness of Zoom meetings compared to Zoom webinars? Are you able to comment on that, either of you gentlemen?
Yeah, so Zoom meetings and Zoom webinars, I'm just kind of going through all the features. They're relatively the same accessibility features, advantages and disadvantages. The meetings obviously are set for like more internal meetings where this is actual webinar, but the captioning is the same. I can't think off the top of my head if there's any really difference between the two in regards to accessibility and usability at this time. Nasser, can you?
No, it is actually more or less the same. However, depending on the captioning integrate, because the Zoom doesn't have captioning, it's a third-party integration. Some of the platforms allow you to have the name of the speaker. So if you want to have a transcription, obviously if you're working in a kind of a meeting, then every individual could be showing the name. If you're in a big, large webinar, then obviously you won't have the names of individuals who are speaking or asking questions. But it's a very subtle, small difference, nothing really big.
Okay, and I'm reminded that I was in a Teams meeting and my deaf colleague couldn't turn on the captions because she wasn't allowed to get the app. So this is an issue in terms of when it's the rules in the company that get in the way, not necessarily the technology. Because apparently with Teams, I can't get captions if I come in through the web. I have to come in through the app. And so is that true for Zoom? Is it true for any of the others? Are we saying to the companies that are listening to us today, they have to let their people get the apps? I'm not quite sure why they don't let
I'll let you, because you deal with a lot of companies.
No, no, it's not. That's not correct. I think the difference between using the app and the web is a bit subtle. You're absolutely right, because some organization will block the sites, and or some won't even let you install the app. So that issue has to be resolved very soon, because people are now using multiple platforms. It's not their choice. They're invited to meetings. They have to have access. That's been removed. I believe even the hardest opponents of this have realized they have to keep up with time. But in terms of Zoom, no, you don't actually have to have the app or the web in order to do caption. Caption appears if it is being captioned, you'll actually see it. You get that option.
But it is true with Teams, isn't it? You need the app.
I didn't actually know that until you just mentioned it. I have actually used captioning both within the app and the web, and I doubt if that would, unless it's blocked. But I have to check that. I haven't really come across that.
Yeah, I don't. It's something to definitely check into. We have 365. We have the whole Microsoft within what we work with, and when we invite people to come. I'm not sure if I'm there and if they have to download the app. I'm assuming they would have to download the app in order to get access to it. But that is something that we should follow up.
One possible technical reason is, of course, I don't know about the actual Microsoft one, but the third-party integration companies will actually provide the captioning using their own URL. And that could be a security risk for some organizations. So I think these are very good things to check. We will actually look at it and put an update into our after this event.
I do want to say that Zoom has had some challenges, and it falls underneath the disadvantages with privacy issues. Obviously, we've seen them in the news about it. They are working extremely hard. The CEO is on that, and they've gotten better. But that has blocked a lot of organizations in using Zoom. And so, in all webinars, we've been able to utilize YouTube because Zoom has a feature on it that automatically streams to YouTube. So in regards to meetings, that's a little different, but for webinars, there's different works around it in regards to using Zoom. I'm seeing there's some questions also.
There are some questions, and I've got one here that I wanted to make sure we didn't skip. Is there a difference in terms of this is the one. Does Office 365 have accessibility features built in? And if so, what are they?
Yes, that's great. Nasser, do you want to go first? Do you want me?
I absolutely. I mean, Office, there was a question. Someone says, why is it taking this long for people these tools to be built in? It's a very good question. I think over the past
come in there, because I tried to get Microsoft to tell people about the accessibility tools they built in 15 years ago. They built them in, but they didn't tell anybody, so the audience didn't know.
I think
that's changed.
Definitely. Microsoft have made it their life mission to go out and evangelize about it.
No,
all because
why wasn't it done earlier? I'm saying Microsoft did a lot earlier, but they didn't tell anybody.
Well, that's because nobody actually realized such an amazing potential of targeting the people who can't access their platform instead of trying to go to the other 80% who can. Steve Jobs was a brilliant genius. He actually discovered that. He made his phones to be accessible to 100% of people. And he never had to talk about it because it was so usable. So accessibility and usability go hand in hand. That's why Microsoft and Google suddenly realized we're missing the game here.
Okay.
They follow.
Answer the question about what is the accessibility features built into Office 365.
Everything that you need to know. It's got the caption, it's got the text-to-speech, speech-to-text, magnification, the checking for accessibility.
Accessibility checking,
Yeah, so it's all in there.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yeah, and one of the things, I'm a horrible speller, number one. So using the suite of Microsoft is phenomenal. And the toolbar, there's a whole website just on Microsoft accessibility. Jenny Lafleur has done a phenomenal job. And Hector Mentos is out there pushing the accessibility features, and it's impressive. But now that what they've done is that they've put them so where people can see them. Well, before they were there, but they were just hidden. And now you see them within the toolkit. So one of them is the Mercer Reader, in the sense of, you have it read back to you. That's incredible. checking of the PowerPoint, of the Word documents, the accessibility check is all built into the toolbar now. So it's pretty robust.
Some of the apps like Seeing AI is such a wonderful tool for people who are blind, because you literally becomes your visual aid to whatever you want to do. You can point it to a picture, or it will read it, or it will tell you what object you're looking at. So these are the things that they've realized it's a massive market for them. And Microsoft, unfortunately for them, they've got too much of it now. It got so much, not even Microsoft people know where it is. So they need to bring it together. They need to make it even easier to access. And that's a
the challenge also, and this is a whole nother discussion, but the challenge also is the assistive technology providers out there. I mean, Microsoft has done such a good job in the sense of cornering the market and a lot of building in the AT and the OS. But now you've got assistive technology vendors out there that have very specialized technology, that's impressive technology, kind of fighting for that same space now. So it's a very interesting place to be right now in the field of accessibility.
Well, and that's probably some of what's behind the question. Is there's so much out there? How do you find the right stuff at the right time?
Yeah, Nasser, this is crazy. There's no consumer reports. I think Chris Law, who's an expert in the field of accessibility, UX, is out there pushing an initiative around having more of a consumer reports, what products work. And even going through this presentation, we struggled on the comparison of all these platforms. And we did find some really good resources out in the deck at the end that does that. But regarding AT or mainstream technology that are built into the OS, it's a lot to take in.
But it's actually, if we look at the simplicity of man-machine interface, is that what is it you're trying to do, and the technology should help you to do it. So if you look at the deficits we have, what something happens to our the five senses is either we can't read or write, or we can't see, or we can't hear. This is where the technology could be applied. Doesn't matter who's made it, the function is the same. Like text-to-speech is something you've got to have it available, which you have it available in your mobile phone, you have it in your desktop machine. If you know where it is, that's all you need to know. I think, yes, there is a lot of technology, but the functionalities are limited. So you don't need to worry about the confused by what's.
So I've got just the right question for you now from the audience. And it says, are there any recommended platforms to include people with intellectual disabilities into meetings with non-disabled people?
Well, that's a tough one. You know why? Because even these companies are making everything mainstream. They always factor in that 80 or 90%, and they still don't go to that 10% who do have that. There are platforms, there are IT systems that you could communicate for people with intellectual deficits, the disabilities, but it won't be a mainstream yet. It's still time to catch up, I'm afraid. It's very specialist.
Chris?
Yeah, I think you're right. But I think if you were to look through the platforms that I'm aware of, and there's one here about Blue Jeans, which we probably need to circle back around to. But the Skype has been something that's been used probably the most within people with intellectual disabilities. From my standpoint, what I've seen, it is a very simple app in a sense. But going to Nasser's point, there's nothing that has been developed or is developed that has a profile that is more, even more simplistic in that sense. So that's something that's interesting. That they're all learning management systems.
Yeah.
Like
but the video conferencing is actually amazing help for that kind of thing. But again, you need to be able to communicate using text and pictures, which is sometimes, as I said, it's available, but is it integrated into these platforms? Not yet. It needs to be worked on.
Yeah.
So I'm conscious of the time, and we did say this was a 3-hour session that we're going to do in an hour. The next question here is quite interesting. Someone who says she has to cover captions as they trigger migraines. Is the concern there that she's not able to cover captions? Can you interpret that question for me, gentlemen?
As in cover caption, not to want to have the captions?
The captions trigger migraines for him, is the question.
Right, you could actually switch it off.
So what you do is depending on what platform you use, Like, for example, if you're using Zoom, so that depends. I mean, I mentioned earlier that under the captions right now feature, it basically is, it reads full transcript. So right now, if you're in this and you go down to the CC button, you'll see, you know, hide subtitles, full view transcripts, and then subtitle settings. Under that, you can actually show the transcript on the side as we're talking, and you can download that. So the challenge is, you know, does the captioning, I think they have to know more, but does the captioning bother you as you're seeing it on the bottom?
I think that's it. I think what I'm interpreting here is the comment is captions should be optional. And so when you're in a meeting and somebody needs captions, is it okay for other people to turn them off? Is that possible?
Yeah. You have that ability. Yeah.
And you've got the ability.
But Nasser, this is interesting, but because, I mean, he brings up a good question. I mean, one of the things that in the best practices I mentioned is that, you know, people with, we get seizures. So again, you want to think about the lighting and, you know, any kind of bright lights or blinking things. Like, there's a lot of backdrops now that you can put in, like I have mine here. They're kind of all over the place, and that can be very distracting for ADHD, can be for strokes, for all kinds. So those things are things to keep in mind of.
Yeah, but actually video itself is a very good point. As a lot of people find having the camera on not comfortable. They want to switch it off, but then others might interpret it as like it's not the right thing to do and they want to see your face. So there's always that negotiation when you do this to make sure people are aware of your comfort zones, what you want and what you don't want to do. And captioning, one of the issues with captioning, because they all rely on automatic speech recognition, and automatic speech recognition actually corrects itself as you're typing, because it tries to make it correct to the context. And that change in text might trigger headaches and migraines and seizures as well. But always make sure the participants are aware of the controls where they can switch off the video, because you could actually switch off the incoming video as well as switching off your own camera, as well as switching off the caption. They're all built into the platform.
And I think you're reminding me, we had talked about the protocols, how we work together in this remote working world now. And for me, what I'm seeing in meetings is the role of the chair has changed. It used to be that a chair would attempt to make people feel comfortable before you started the conversation. You know, did you go on holiday? Where have you been? Now they go straight to the biz. And I think what I'm hearing is the question should be, is there anybody who would like to have the cameras off today? Because I know some of us are getting really tired of it. Or I had a colleague in EY the other day saying, I'm an introvert, I don't want my camera on. Never mind all the other reasons why. You know, someone with a disfigurement telling me recently that looking at their face on the screen as well as the face of the person they're talking to is disconcerting. So I think for me, it's being a little more careful about how we structure the meetings.
Here's an easy way out. Tell them I have a low bandwidth on my internet and can I switch off the camera so it doesn't. And people won't ask you a second time.
Okay, that's a tip. That's a tip. Now, come on, we've got to answer as many of these questions as we can. Any platform recommendations for people with autism or dyslexia?
Yeah, so that's a great question. You know, I can speak for the dyslexia, definitely, and autism, I guess, a little bit. I'm dyslexic. I was diagnosed in the 2nd grade with something that they called not dyslexia back then. And I've been involved in Learning Disability Association organizations for years. There's no flat out straight answer. I mean, there's no like, oh, this is the best. You know, like I said, there's no research out there. I'd love to see that for autism and for learning disabilities and others. But I will say that as much as I like Teams 365, I mean, it's so easy. It's so nice. It's got everything built in. It can also be very overwhelming. But at the same time, it keeps you on track. It keeps, if you're ADHD and there's a high piece of people with learning disabilities with ADHD, it's quite high combined. So I think 365 is wonderful if it's eased into. I'm a big fan of 365. And frankly, Zoom is great. It just doesn't have all the integrated pieces. So what am I going to lose? Am I going to lose the chat? I mean, it's great to have the transcript. But with 365, I've got all those accessibility features built into it. I can open Word up. The ribbon is right there. And I can take notes and spell check it and have it read back to me. So anyway, Nasser, sorry.
But no, I think this is all coming back to usability engagement versus accessibility. So if you are on a video call like this, it's perfect for autistic people. If they like text, they can even switch off the camera, and that's all they need. They don't need to be seen or to see anyone. They just want to hear what's going on. But dyslexia, similar, there are certain issues you need to address. Those deficits, maybe short-term memory, they might forget what you were, want. The transcription is perfect, and also they can, if you're able to change the font colors and the size, then again, it caters for a lot of them. But platforms are really, can be configured, but then you take the meaning away and the purpose away. So if you're having a meeting like this, and if you want to fiddle with all those controls, actually you lose the whole engagement piece. So there's a balance, but knowing the tool is important. There are lots in there that you could configure to be to your liking. Not all of them have that, but certainly Microsoft and Zoom have spent a lot of time trying to make it accessible to most people.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I was asked by Tata Consulting was, they have a lot of people trying to access and work remotely on their phones. Have you any comments on any particular issues or how you can make it easier for people, other than to suggest they just buy them computers instead?
It depends on the job they have to do, Susan. It's really horses for courses. I mean, for low connectivity areas, the phone is the only way to do it. So that's the bottom line. If you don't have internet, if you can dial in, that's your perfect solution. The trouble is, you need to have that facility in the platform, like what Chris was saying earlier. With Zoom, you can get local numbers and you can dial in and you can listen to the conversation. It's impractical to actually have a video call, to have meaningful one on a mobile phone. It's difficult, but yeah, desktop or laptop would be an ideal solution for them, or even an iPad or
because of the
tablet.
captioning, right? I mean, the captioning.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want that, otherwise, too smaller screen, impractical, and I'm not sure what you gain from seeing people's faces if you're just trying to understand what the conversation is all about.
Yeah, it goes back to the whole thing is, is it, obviously we're talking more meetings now here, not a webinar in a sense, but the apps, for Teams, for example, Skype, for Zoom, mobile apps are great. I mean, they work pretty well. But again, it really depends on the job that they're doing. Like Nasser said, that's very important. So you write down those job activities, and then some of them you can't do on a mobile device, I would think.
As a best practice, it's always good to pass the material you want to discuss to the participants, especially for meetings. If you've got a presentation, send it to them in advance, because they know what you're going to talk about. Then they can make up the conversation up and link it to the content. And even if you are on the phone and someone says on page, I'm going to the next page, this is at least you've got in front of you, printed, you can actually follow the conversation. That's really just a good etiquette and good practice.
Well, indeed, you remind me, when we were talking about today, you said that often it's a kind of etiquette issue, that if you remember to send your presentation to your visually impaired colleague before, then it's a lot easier for them to make sure that it works for them before they suddenly sit in the meeting and discover they can't access it. So have you any other thoughts on what can be done in terms simply of how you manage the workflow that makes it easier for people with access needs?
I always say, don't just think about the present company, think about others who might be watching this recording. So it's not like I went out and asked everyone, do you have any access needs? Do you want captioning? And everyone says, no, we don't. But what if you record this and somebody who is deaf needs to watch it and there's no captioning? So obviously you've lost that engagement. So the best practice always is go prepared. And that's what has been missing in accessibility. People don't think about the consequences. They just do an easy job out of their hands, and somebody else has to worry about the consequences. I think with any meeting, if you want to do it properly, do share the documents, do obviously make sure that it is accessible. And then whatever you do during the meeting, they have already made provisions for themselves, even if you can't provide it using the platform.
No, it's interesting that in the U.S. it's, you know, students with disabilities, they, you know, a lot of them are what they call underneath individual education plans. It's a plan, and then when they go to work, they get individual work plans. You know, if they stay in the system, so under, you know, special education versus VR for rehab. In a sense, I think of it the same way. You know, what you know, you got to make the meeting accessible. You know, and you've got to follow these best practices and the common things that you should do, plain language and so on. But then your point, Susan, was about, you know, the process in which, you know, running your work schedule. So what you take those action items from that meeting and what do you do with them? You know, so that there's all that piece of that. And a lot of the, like, Teams 365 has those components in it. So you might, you want to package it a little bit, because once you leave the meeting, you still got to do the work. You still got to spell everything right. You still be able to read it. You know, you still got to be able to access captions on videos. So it's more than just the meeting itself, right?
Absolutely. You know, and as I'm looking at the clock, there was a question I wanted to ask you all. I was talking to a large company recently, and they didn't have anyone in their IT department able to do this presentation, or even with that they would regard as having useful insights into how the accessibility agenda should be managed in the business, or that they could call in to say, help me with this individual employee who needs this to change. So one of the suggestions I was going to make, or ask you if it was feasible, would be for, as a result of this crisis, for companies to actually say they simply must have 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't know how many people it is in their IT department who get this stuff, and as an internal resource.
Well, that, you know, that's what I
to ask.
Yeah, NASA, this is, I mean, I know you work with companies regarding 18 so on, but the IAAP is all about, you know, certification, training, and networking. So our goal is to get as many people certified in understanding what disability is, and we have a certification, professional certification on that, and then web accessibility. We're doing one on accessible document specialists, so making sure that documents are accessible, and those need to be integrated into the organization in all areas: HR, procurement, marketing, communication, IT. It's got to be sprinkled all over the organization for it to make a big difference. And you've got to have ambassadors and leaders in these, and
expertise.
Expertise is not an issue. You can bring experts in. What is missing? Prioritization. For example, GDPR is a huge issue because they know they get sued and they could pay fines. But they're also breaking the law with accessibility in many countries is a legal requirement. They're not really worried about it to be sued for that. That is the problem. And I mean, for example, if you go to a major corporation, even if you get the color of the logo wrong, you get ticked off, because that's not important to the image. Why not actually have the accessibility on the same level? It's a matter of understanding the requirement and prioritizing for it. Technical issues is the least of their worries, because there are lots of people who could do that for them as long as they want to make it happen.
Well, that's a nice feisty ending to our conversation. Excellent. And so the message to our audience is, please start to sue the multinationals. No, I guess that's not really.
Oh gosh.
No.
The message here is that it has to matter. The message is it has to matter. And that's what I was saying at the beginning. I do think there is a growing appetite to ensure that this technology enables everybody to contribute. People are starting to really get it. And the expertise that the two of you have brought to this conversation is the kind of expertise that now they will have to prioritize, and I'm sure they will. And so I think I'm about to hand over to Jürgen, absolutely on time. My goodness, Jürgen, we're good at this, aren't we? I've got.
Thank you. Perfect. Yes. Perfect, Susan. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and special thanks, of course, to Nasser and Christopher. I personally learned a lot. Of course, I'm also remotely working, so that's personally rewarding. But of course, in the ILO, of course, we also advise others on how they can do a better job in ensuring accessibility for the teams that they're working with. So very much appreciated all the insights, and I think I'll rewatch the webinar again to learn. I mean, to check all the platforms and solutions you mentioned. So thank you very much. Also, thank you very much for all those who followed us here directly in Zoom, but also on the Facebook live stream. In peak times, we had about 150, 160 people following us live. So that's very much appreciated. Also special thanks to the live captioners, and also thanks to Nasser for facilitating the live captioning today. Thank you very much. Also thanks to my colleague Frey, who was supporting this webinar technically. And just a reminder that the recording of this webinar, also the slides we saw today, will be available shortly on the website of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network. businessanddisability.org is the URL. So thank you very much again, everybody. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. See you soon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.